for the Democratic Party. Adam Winstanley and Carter Winstanley, principals of Winstanley Enterprises, developer of the downtown crossing in New Haven, each gave $10,000 last year to the federal account of the state Democratic Party. As did a third partner. Its anchor tenant, Alexian Pharmaceuticals, is relocating with a $51 million state incentive grant. Winstanley Enterprises gave a total of $50,000 to the Connecticut State Democratic Party. Wissam Ahmad of Forest Hills, New York, gave $10,000 to the Connecticut Democratic Party on March 25th, less than 2 weeks after the state awarded his engineering firm, HAKS, an $8.63 million contract to inspect overhead and power lines on New Haven line of Metro North. Last year, he and 6 others associated with HAKS gave $45,000 to the state Democratic Party's federal account. Ed Snyder wrote a $10,000 check on August 27th, 6 months after Comcast's Spectacor's subsidy, Global Spectrum, was chosen to manage the XL Center in Hartford and Rensselaer Field in East Hartford. He subsequently returned his check. Mark Summers of Sarasota, Florida, the project manager of Bridgeport Landing, a waterfront redevelopment in Bridgeport, gave $10,000 on September 26th, a day before the State Bond Commission approved $31 million in financing for Summers' anchor tenant, Bass Pro Shops. As the State Department of Transportation opposition to the proposed transfer of the Bridgeport Port Jefferson Ferry Terminal finally evaporated last year, the company's chief executive officer, Brian McAllister, wrote a $20,000 check to the Connecticut Democrats' federal account. Philip Cambo, of Sturbridge, Mass., president of Northern Tree Service, a state contractor, gave the state Democratic Party's federal account $10,000. Jane Copa of Delray Beach, Florida, an executive with the Simon Conover Company of Delray Beach, Florida, is the company's founder, and Stephen Conover of the West Hartford is on Conover's board of directors. All gave $10,000, totaling $50,000 to the Connecticut Democratic Party's federal account. Francisco Borges, chairman of the Landmark Partners, a state contractor, gave $20,000 to the state's federal account. Alan Lazowiski, chairman of Laz Parking, gave $20,000 to the state's Democratic federal account. John Strafstrom, a partner in Bridgeport law firm of Pullman & Conley, a state contractor, gave $10,000 to the Connecticut Democrats' federal account. Bob and Kelly Landino each gave $10,000. Landino is president of Center Plan Development, also a state contractor. All this money is prohibited under our state law to be given to the state account and used in statewide offices. Yet all that money was given. In fact, the state Democratic Party, as all parties do, have 2 pots of money, the state and the federal. In the state account, if you check the most recent filings, the state Democratic Party has only about $320,000 left over. But in their federal account, they have in excess of $2 million. In a tight legislative, senatorial, and certainly gubernatorial races, they want to spend that money. But the law prohibits them from doing that. So what do they want to do? They've hired a person to go to the federal agency and say, please tell the state to butt out of our business. We don't want to follow that law. We want to do it our way. What we are doing here today is calling on the State Elections Enforcement Commission to enforce state law. In that, regardless of what the federal opinion given by the Federal Elections Commission is, that state law is state law, and it should be enforced to its fullest. Therefore, if any candidate who has taken the sworn oath and has received citizen election money benefits in the slightest degree from the kind of influx of money from the state Democrats' federal account, they should be fined and penalized to the full extent of the law, and as they've indicated, personally liable to repay the entire citizen election grant back to the state of Connecticut. You know, you have one-party rule for a long time, and many of us, certainly on this side of the aisle, have been bemoaning the fact of the arrogance and brazenness and the dangers of one-party rule. Here is yet another example. If, in fact, the Democrats truly believe laws as we currently have, the very laws that they fought for. I quote upon quote from the former chairs and current chairs of the elections enforcement and the general elections committees of the General Assembly, calling for getting money out of politics, keeping everything on the up and up, removing the specter of influence. And yet this very party is going in the dark of night, if you will, without any publicity, asking that those rules be tossed in the garbage. It is wrong. If they wanted to change the rules, do it in the light of day, do it under the legislative process, do it with public input, do it in the full specter of the public, having questions asked of them, answer them, pass the law, and sign the law. That's the way, if you want to change the law, that's the way to do it, not the way they're doing it. This time I'll turn it over to Senator McCain.
In 2005, the overriding goal was to clean up our election system. The single most important factor, supported unanimously, even those of us who didn't support public financing, all supported an amendment that eliminated contractor influence in our elections. We banned contractor contributions from state elections. The federal court upheld that ban. What the governor is trying to do is shamelessly undo that ban on contractors. There's a reason why the Democrats' federal account has over $1 million and their state account has very little. Because they have gone out and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from state contractors, people doing business with the state. And our goal was to give people in Connecticut the assurance that those contractors would not have an influence or even an appearance of influence in our election system. And unfortunately, that is all going by the wayside with this attempt. Several years later, most recently, when Governor Malloy championed increasing the amount state contractors could give to the federal account, up to $10,000. Many of us, I remember Senator McLaughlin, standing on the Senate floor saying, this is what's going to happen. That money is going to find its way into our state elections. And Democrat after Democrat after Democrat stood up and said, no, Senator, you're wrong. This is what we need to do to fight the influence of Citizens United. Well, guess what? He was right, and we were right. And the silence by the Democrats in this legislature, who stood up and fought for clean elections, who said contractors have no business in our elections, is deafening. They need to stand with us. They need to stand up against the effort of their party to undo our state election laws. Having recently gone through a larger statewide race, I can tell you that the SCEC does an incredible job. They work hard, they're understaffed, they follow our laws. They should not be bullied or intimidated by this governor into wiping out the importance of our state laws. And we will stand in support of them in enforcing our state laws and hope that the Democrats will join us in doing just that.
I'd like to add that I listed a series of state contractors who contributed to the state Democratic Party. Please understand, I in no way imply that they did anything wrong. Those are totally legal. But they were under the impression, I presume, that the monies that they donated were going to the federal laws and that the party that they were donating was going to follow all laws, including the state law. It is the Democratic Party that wants to turn their contributions that were prohibited from being used in state races and put them into state races. And if I was one of those donators who's made to look bad, made to look as if they have done something wrong and are trying to garner undue influence, I would be equally annoyed. And I would call upon the Democratic Party to stop doing what they're attempting to do. At this point, we'll take any questions from reporters.
When you're talking about if the FEC gives the Democratic Party the answer that they're apparently looking for, you're saying the State Election Enforcement Commission should ignore it? What do you say? Sue the federal government? I mean,
I don't think they should sue it at all.
How can if the feds say you can spend the money that way, how can a state agency stop that?
What the feds have jurisdiction over is federal money in federal elections. And what the state Democratic Party is asking is how they're asking a federal agency for an opinion as to how they can spend their federal money. The state of Connecticut, and it's our state elections enforcement commission, has jurisdiction over state money. The millions of dollars in citizen election funds that we have given out, that is state money, with state rules attached thereto, rules that have been approved by the United States Court of Appeals, and rules that everyone swears to and understands that if they violate those rules, they're subject to personal penalty. What we are asking, Paul, for the state elections enforcement to do is enforce the law over which they have jurisdiction and the use of the money over which they have jurisdiction. I'm talking about state taxpayers' money, millions of dollars that have been given to hundreds of candidates under the Citizens Election Program. We're asking them to enforce the law that they have jurisdiction over.
Short of that, I mean, even before that, are you looking for any declaration or statement from the Elections Enforcement Commission now as to how they see the law and what should be done?
Yes, I would hope that they would, in advance of any ruling or opinion given by the Federal Elections Commission as requested by the State Democratic Party, that they would reiterate their belief that they have jurisdiction over state funds, that any use of federal funds that have been commingled with contractor money in contravention of Connecticut law would be prohibited from being used in statewide elections, and to do so would be a penalty that they would be willing to enforce. We are looking for them to make that declaration.
Would you want that to be specific to this actual proposal for the mailing that was outlined in the letter to the NBC?
As you can see from the request from the State Democratic Party, they're looking to get this done in a hurry. An election is, what, 4 weeks away today? They want an opinion so they can spend this money and spend it quickly. I think that the State Elections Enforcement Commission should make their declaration, make it soon, and make it pertain to any expenditures from this point on that come out of the federal state Democratic account to be used for state Democratic candidates. Senator Sanders.
Just to follow up on that, John, by Friday, people have a right to comment on this request. You have to file by Friday with the FEC those comments. And I understand that our Republican Senate caucus certainly is going to file. I assume the House will too. And I think the SEC has already made it clear that they intend to file an objection, if you would, to that request, and reiterating the positions that the courts have held, that both Senator McKinney and Senator Farrell talked about, and the purpose of the law, and reiterating how this law came to be and how it's been upheld, and that we are sort of separate. So, but you have till Friday to make that filing.
They maybe clear it out. So did they tell you that?
Well, when I read about this and called up and asked what their position was, they said that they were going to comment by Friday, that was the comment period. I went on the FEC website, found where the request was, found out how you make the comment, and I intend to comment. But my understanding is they felt strongly in conversations that their laws need to be protected. We need to keep contractor money out of the election. That was the purpose. And they want to make sure that the federal government understands the history of the law and understands that's the position of the state.
Can I just, there's a reason why the Democratic Party is making an appeal to the Federal Election Commission, not the State Election Commission, because I think, as we saw earlier, where the Democrat Party, Democrat Governors Association tried to sue our state and then backed off as they realized they were wrong. But I just think Larry explained the ad and the mail piece, and if you haven't seen it, I hope you'll take a look at this. And I hope everyone in Connecticut understands. This is the mail piece. It says, on November 4th, vote for Dan Malloy for governor. Democrat Governor Dan Malloy has put us on a path to progress. It is all about what Democrat Governor Dan Malloy has done, and they want to use federal funds to do that. There isn't a single legislator who voted for that bill in 2005 who would have said that is how the federal account money is supposed to be used. I defy you to find somebody who would say that, because if they did, they would be lying. This is a clear violation of what was intended. And if they are allowed to do this, they have then said contractor money is back in play in Connecticut. is pay for play, and everything that they said we needed to get rid of is now back on the table. And for the record, the current governor was very outspoken in 2010 when he ran against a Democrat opponent in a primary about how he was defending our Citizens Election Fund and our state clean election laws, and very definitive about he was defending our state election laws in the race of 2010. And now he is leading the charge to do away.
So if the FEC rules and decides to allow the Democratic Party to use these federal funds, that's it for pretty much.
Well,
That's what you're saying.
I think what we're saying is that our state elections enforcement commission should stand up and say, we're not letting you do that. Again, as
No, but
Larry...
if this does happen, if this does go
The end of the
forward,
day.
then we
Sure, at the
can't
end of the
say
day.
that.
Sure, and the best example is the gentleman Ed Snyder, who's never given to anyone in Connecticut ever before, gave a $10,000 check to the Democratic State Committee. And they said, you can't do that, you're a contractor. So he returned the money and then wrote a $10,000 check to the federal account. It's hard not to believe that this was the plan all along, but we need to stop it. And I think as Larry pointed out, which is very important, we all sign, if you participate, a sworn statement to abide by the laws of Connecticut. Not the federal laws, but our state's laws. And our state's laws clearly say you cannot have contractor money in state campaigns. So even if the federal law wants to say there's something different, Dan Malloy's sworn statement is he will live by Connecticut laws. And on that case, Connecticut law is very clear. So he's violating his own sworn statement by even attempting to do this.
Getting back to your earlier point, what would you say to Democrats who say, well, I voted that way in 2005, but then Citizens United came along and changed the landscape?
So citizens' elections is very different from Connecticut barring state contractor money in state elections. I think as the federal court, and again, it bears repeating, this was a federal court saying the state can do this. Remember, the same federal court said the state could not prohibit lobbyists, for example, from contributing. And perhaps in New York or New Mexico, a federal district court would have reached a different decision. But it was the specifics of the history of corruption in Connecticut which led the court to the extraordinary decision that in Connecticut, you can prohibit this because we need to ensure clean elections. That does not change with Citizens United, and I think it's fair to say, as we've seen with Citizens United, both parties have super PACs and other outside entities which are helping them. That's completely unrelated to state contractors directly providing campaign help to state races.
Also,
But
to that point,
don't the
Paul,
same contractors give money to those organizations you just mentioned? Aren't they free to?
But here's the difference. The difference is that candidates cannot, and it's fair for people to smirk at this, cannot in any way coordinate with any of those super PACs. You're allowed to coordinate with the state party. In fact, Dan Malloy has proudly proclaimed that he is the head of the Democrat State Party, and we know he is in charge of every decision that Democrat State Party makes with its funds. So it is a direct coordination which you cannot have with the outside groups, and that is a defining difference.
also, Paul, after Citizens United, this legislature had a crack at modifying our campaign election laws in response to Citizens United. And the Democrats led the charge on that and were very clear about it and passed the various reforms and modifications that we saw in 2013. But through that entire time, post-Citizens United, the one principle that was upheld by those very Democrats and the entire General Assembly was that contractor money has absolutely no place in Connecticut state elections. They reaffirmed that over and over again and post-Citizens United. So anybody who uses the excuse as well, since Citizens United, the world has changed, they had the opportunity, still do, to change those rules, state laws, in the normal processes. They didn't do it because they believed, as we did, that the cornerstone of campaign finance reform was to keep contractor money out of state elections. They have completely thrown away that principle. They want to completely overturn it. And as Christine indicated, if they get what they want, we can take our campaign finance reform bill and rip it up and throw it in the garbage.
Larry, if this money laundering gambit works, I'm surprised you guys haven't used that as a verb, but there it is for you. How much of a disadvantage are state Republicans at with their national, with their federal savings? Are you guys down $1 million compared to them? As far as
I don't know what's in our state account versus our federal account with regard to our party.
is there anybody
But
out
let's
there
be realistic. If you are prohibited from soliciting from contractors that do business with the state, and the chief executive officer of the state of Connecticut, the governor, appeals to you to give money to his party under the guise that I won't benefit from it because we have laws that prevent that, and you give that money, maybe to curry favor with that governor or what have you, and all of a sudden those rules change, we're in bad shape. And that's exactly what the Democrats are attempting to do. I remember when the governor crisscrossed this country, Senator McKinney was the most vocal critic, saying, how could you stand before a group that has within its midst people that do business with the state of Connecticut and ask them for money for your party? And the answer was, because I'm abiding by the law, they're only going to give to the federal account, which I do not benefit from. They want to change that.
Okay, is there anybody on State Central who's close enough to figure out how much you guys are at a disadvantage if they get this okay from the FEC? Nobody's.
No,
I think it's safe to, I think it's safe to say that they have more in their federal account than we do. But I also think if you look at their accounts, they have significantly less in their state account than they do in their federal account. Even so much so that the dozens and dozens of employees that they've hired that are supposed to be, whose salaries are supposed to be apportioned between the federal and the state accounts, upon which they're working for both. They don't have money in their state accounts to cover it, and I think we'll say we can pay for it all out of the federal account because we get to, because federal law is different.
So is this basically an admission that they can't, they increase the amount of money that an individual will do to a state party?
State party federal account.
Yeah. Well, also to
Right,
the state
right.
account. So is this just an admission that they can't shake anybody down $15,000 not?
it's an admission of a lot of things. It's an admission that, boy, this race is a lot tighter than they thought it would be. It's an admission that we talk about campaign finance and doing the right thing when it suits us. When it doesn't suit us, when the political landscape is such that we think we're at a disadvantage, we'll just change the rules. We'll change the rules. There's a history of that, Christine. They put themselves at the top of the line. We had to go to court to say that the Republicans belong on the top of the line because they just interpreted the way they wanted to interpret because they thought it was to their advantage. When they needed more money after 2010, when they had a public campaign finance candidate like Dan Malloy versus a privately financed self-funder, they needed more money. We got called into special session in July. They changed the rules. When they got scared that maybe the independent party would start endorsing Republicans, they put a law to ban the independent party. Their idea is, if the rules don't suit us, we'll just change them. Now, sometimes they get caught and they get embarrassed and they got to back off from it. And that's why this time, they didn't have a press conference. They didn't have a public hearing. They hired a lawyer in Washington to go to the FEC and change the rule and do it quickly. That's what they've done. And I'm not sure they would have even done that had it not been for the vigilance of the SEC, who saw this coming down the pike, saw their behavior, and was watching them as they should do, like a hawk. So they probably couldn't get away with it. They figured we got to do something official, so we'll hire a Washington attorney and do it that way.
if we were to look in the Connecticut GOP's federal account, would there be no money at all from state contractors?
There'd probably be a ton of money from state contractors, but not a nickel, would be or has ever been used in a state race, ever.
How do you know that?
How do I know that? Because I know that my party is very strict about not taking the funds that you raise federally and using to benefit a statewide campaign. I know that as head of the House Republicans and overseeing the elections that our candidates and challengers have put forth, I can tell you with absolute certainty that not one nickel has come from any fund that has contractor contributions in it. That's how I know. Any other questions or comments? Folks, thank you so much for